She dialed the wrong number in tears. Never expects the stranger who picked is a lonely billionaire. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. On the other end, Sophia's voice cracked with desperation as tears streamed down her face. Her car had just died at a remote gas station, smoke billowing from under the hood, and she was stranded with her last $20 in her wallet and a phone with barely any battery left. She thought she was calling her brother, but her trembling fingers had dialed 1 digit wrong. The man who answered wasn't her brother. It was Alexander Blackwood, one of the wealthiest men in the country, sitting alone in his penthouse office, contemplating the emptiness of his success. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach across the world. And if you're enjoying this already, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story like this one. Please, I need help. Sophia sobbed into the phone, not realizing her mistake yet. My car broke down and I don't know what to do. I'm at the old Chevron station on Route 47 and there's nobody here. The mechanic left for the day and I can't afford a tow truck. Alexander sat up straighter in his leather chair. He could have easily told her she had the wrong number and hung up, but something in her voice stopped him. Maybe it was the genuine fear mixed with exhaustion, or perhaps it was because he hadn't heard anyone speak to him with such raw emotion in years. Everyone in his life wanted something from him: money, connections, favors. But this stranger on the phone didn't even know who he was. Take a deep breath, he found himself saying, his deep voice calm and reassuring. You're going to be okay. Tell me exactly where you are. Sophia paused, confusion mixing with her panic. Wait, Jake? You sound different. Are you sick? I'm not Jake, Alexander admitted. You've dialed the wrong number, but I'm still going to help you. There was silence on the other end, and Alexander could almost hear her debating whether to hang up. In her position, he probably would have ended the call immediately, but desperation has a way of making people take chances they normally wouldn't. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have bothered you. I'll figure something out. No, wait, Alexander said quickly, surprising himself with how much he didn't want her to hang up. I meant what I said. Let me help you. Route 47, you said. The old Chevron. Yes, but why would you help a stranger? Alexander looked around his empty office, at the awards on the walls that meant nothing, at the city lights below that made him feel more isolated than connected. Maybe because I need to remember what it feels like to help someone who doesn't expect anything from me, he said honestly. Within minutes, Alexander had arranged for his personal mechanic to head to the gas station. He stayed on the phone with Sophia, learning that she was a kindergarten teacher, driving home from a job interview at a school 3 hours away. She'd taken the interview hoping for better pay to help with her mother's medical bills, but they'd turned her down. The car breaking down felt like the final straw in a series of disappointments. I'm usually not this much of a mess, Sophia said, her voice steadier now. I pride myself on having it together, but lately it feels like everything's falling apart. We all have those moments, Alexander replied, thinking of his own struggles that money couldn't solve. The loneliness that had settled into his bones, the way success had isolated him from genuine human connection. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help when you need it. They talked for an hour while waiting for the mechanic. Alexander learned that Sophia volunteered at a literacy center on weekends, that she'd named her beat-up Honda Civic Harold because it made odd noises that sounded like an old man clearing his throat, and that she believed in finding something beautiful in each day, even the hard ones. What about you? Sophia asked. What do you do when you're not rescuing strangers with car trouble? Alexander hesitated. He could tell her the truth, that he ran a multi-billion-dollar tech company, that he lived in a penthouse worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes, that he had everything except the one thing money couldn't buy: genuine connection. But something made him hold back. I work in business, he said simply. Lots of meetings, lots of traveling, not nearly as important as teaching 5-year-olds how to read. Sophia laughed. and the sound was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. You'd be surprised how similar they are. Both involve a lot of patience and occasionally wanting to pull your hair out. When the mechanic arrived, Alexander insisted on covering the cost, brushing off Sophia's protests. "Consider it a random act of kindness," he said. "Pass it on when you can." "I don't even know your name," Sophia realized. "Alex," he said, using the shortened version he hadn't used since college, back when he was just another student with big dreams, instead of a billionaire with a hollow heart. "Thank you, Alex. I'm Sophia, and I promise, someday I'll find a way to pay this forward." They hung up after the mechanic confirmed the car would be fixed within the hour. Alexander sat in his office, staring at his phone, feeling more alive than he had in months. He'd built his empire on calculated risks and strategic moves, but nothing had felt as right as helping a stranger who dialed his number by accident. 3 days passed. Alexander threw himself into work, but his mind kept drifting to the kindergarten teacher with the broken-down car and the beautiful laugh. He'd resisted the urge to use his resources to find out more about her, respecting her privacy even as curiosity gnawed at him. He told himself it was better this way, a perfect moment preserved in time, untainted by the complications his wealth always brought to relationships. Then his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer. "Alex?" Sophia's voice was bright, nervous. "I hope you don't mind. I saved your number. I wanted to thank you properly. What you did, it meant more than you know." "I'm glad I could help," Alexander said, his heart racing in a way that boardroom negotiations never caused. "I also wanted to tell you that something amazing happened. The school called back. Apparently their first choice took another position, and they offered me the job. It's like everything turned around after that horrible day. My mom says you must be my guardian angel." Alexander smiled. "I'm no angel, just someone who answered the phone at the right time." "Well, angel or not, I owe you dinner. I know you probably have better things to do, but if you're ever free, I make a mean lasagna. It's the least I can do." Alexander knew he should say no. He'd learned long ago that his wealth complicated everything, turned genuine gestures into transactions, made people see dollar signs instead of him. But something about Sophia felt different. She had no idea who he was, and he wanted to keep it that way, at least for a little while longer. "I love lasagna," he said. They arranged to meet that Saturday. Sophia gave him her address, a modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood 40 minutes from his penthouse. Alexander drove himself there in his least expensive car, a simple sedan he kept for the rare occasions when he wanted to blend in. Sophia answered the door wearing a flour-dusted apron, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. "You came," she said, seeming genuinely surprised. "I said I would. I know, but I figured someone who could send a mechanic that quickly probably had more exciting Saturday night options." If only she knew, Alexander thought, how many exclusive events he'd turned down over the years, how many gala dinners had left him feeling emptier than before he'd arrived. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with plants and books and photos of smiling children. Her students, she explained. The lasagna was indeed excellent, but it was the conversation that nourished something deeper in Alexander. They talked about everything and nothing, favorite books, worst movies, childhood dreams. Sophia had a way of finding joy in small things that reminded him of who he used to be before success had complicated everything. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said as they shared a bottle of inexpensive wine that tasted better than vintages from his personal cellar. "That night when I called, you sounded sad. Not at first, but when you talked about needing to remember what it felt like to help someone. Are you okay?" Alexander set down his glass, struck by her perceptiveness. People surrounded by his wealth rarely look deeper than the surface. "I've been better," he admitted. "Success isn't always what it seems. Want to talk about it?" And surprisingly, he did. Without revealing the extent of his wealth, he told her about feeling disconnected, about how achieving every goal he'd set had left him wondering what came next, about the loneliness that success couldn't cure. "I think," Sophia said thoughtfully, "that we all have different kinds of broken-down cars. Mine was literal. Yours might be metaphorical, But either way, sometimes we need someone to help us get back on the road. They met again the following week for coffee, then for a walk in the park, then for a movie at a small theatre that Alexander hadn't even known existed, despite living in the city for 15 years. Each time he told himself he'd reveal the truth about who he was, and each time he found excuses to maintain the fiction. He wasn't lying exactly. Everything he told her was true. He just omitted the magnitude of his success. Sophia brought light into his life in ways he hadn't expected. She sent him funny texts during boring meetings, pictures of her students' art projects, quotes from books she thought he'd like. She had no idea that the boring meetings were with Fortune 500 CEOs or that he could buy the entire school where she worked without blinking. A month into their friendship, because that's what they both carefully called it, despite the undercurrent of something deeper, Sophia invited him to her school's career day. "I know it's not your thing," she said apologetically, "but we need someone to talk about business, and you're good at explaining things. Plus the kids would love you." Alexander agreed immediately, even though it meant rearranging a board meeting that had been scheduled for months. He showed up in a simple suit, introduced himself as Mr. Alex, who works with computers, and spent an hour fielding questions from 5-year-olds about whether computers could eat cookies and if robots would take over the world. Watching Sophia with her students revealed another layer of her character. She was patient, creative, and genuinely invested in each child's success. When one little boy started crying because he'd spilled juice on his drawing, she knelt beside him and helped him see how the spill had created an interesting pattern they could incorporate into the art. "You're amazing with them," Alexander told her afterward. "They're easy to love," Sophia replied. "They haven't learned to be anything but themselves yet." The comment hit closer to home than she could have known. Alexander realized he'd been everything but himself for so long that he'd almost forgotten who that person was, except with her. With Sophia, he could just be Alex. 2 months after the wrong number call, Alexander knew he was in love. It had happened gradually, like sunrise, darkness giving way to light so slowly you don't notice until suddenly the whole world is illuminated. He loved her laugh, her optimism, her way of seeing beauty in ordinary moments. He loved that she didn't care about his watch or his car or any of the status symbols that others noticed immediately. Most of all, he loved who he was when he was with her, but with love came fear. How could he tell her the truth now? How could he explain that the Alex she knew was real, but incomplete? That he'd hidden a fundamental part of his life, not out of deception, but out of a desperate need to be seen as just a man, not a bank account. The universe has a way of forcing our hand when we hesitate too long. It happened at a charity gala that Alexander couldn't avoid attending. He'd mentioned to Sophia that he had a work event, downplaying it as usual. What he hadn't expected was for her to be there too, brought as a guest by the school principal who'd received tickets from a donor. Alexander saw her before she saw him. She was wearing a simple black dress, looking uncomfortable among the designer gowns and jewelry that cost more than her annual salary. He watched her eyes widen as she took in the opulence of the ballroom. The same room where he'd been honored countless times for donations that meant less to him than the hour he'd spent reading to her kindergarten class. Then she saw him. He was standing with a group of executives, and someone was thanking him loudly for his $10 million contribution to the Education Foundation. The color drained from her face as she connected the dots. The Alex she knew with Alexander Blackwood, whose name was on the building where the gala was being held. Their eyes met across the room. Alexander excused himself immediately, but Sophia was already heading for the exit. He caught up with her in the parking lot. "Sophia, wait, please let me explain." She turned, and the hurt in her eyes was worse than any business loss he'd ever faced. "Explain what?" "That you've been lying to me for 2 months. That every time I worried about money in front of you, you were secretly a billionaire. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "I never lied," Alexander said desperately. "Everything I told you was true." "You lied by omission. That's worse. It means you didn't trust me." "I did trust you. I do trust you. That's why I couldn't tell you. Everyone in my life wants something from me. You were the first person in years who just wanted me. Just Alex. But I didn't really have you, did I? I had a version of you, a character you were playing." "No," Alexander insisted. "The person you know is more real than the one in that ballroom. With you, I remembered who I was before the money, before the success. I wasn't playing a character. I was finally being myself." Sophia shook her head, tears threatening. "How can I believe anything now? Was helping me that first night just some rich person's game? Was I a project? A way to feel good about yourself? You were never a project. You were a miracle, a wrong number that turned into the rightest thing in my life." "I need time," Sophia said. "I need to think." She left, and Alexander stood in the parking lot, surrounded by luxury cars, feeling poorer than he'd ever been. A week passed with no contact. Alexander threw himself into work, but found no satisfaction in it. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, and Sophia had demolished them with her warmth and authenticity. Now, without her, he felt exposed to a cold he'd forgotten existed. He thought about grand gestures. He could donate a library to her school, set up a foundation in her name, pay off her mother's medical bills anonymously. But he knew Sophia well enough to understand that such gestures would only prove her point. She didn't want his money. She'd wanted his truth. Finally, he did the only thing he could think of. He wrote her a letter, not an email or a text, but an actual letter, handwritten on simple paper. "Dear Sophia," he wrote, "you asked if you were a project, a way for me to feel good about myself. The truth is the opposite. You made me realize how little good I'd been feeling, how empty success can be when you have no one real to share it with. I'm not asking for forgiveness for hiding my wealth. I'm asking for understanding. When you called that night, crying about your broken car, you had no idea who I was. For the first time in years, someone needed my help, not my money. Someone talked to me, not to my bank account. Someone laughed at my jokes without calculating what they could gain from making me happy. You showed me kindness when you thought I was nobody special. You shared your lasagna and your dreams and your students' artwork. You sent me funny texts that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with joy. You reminded me that the best parts of life can't be bought. I should have told you the truth sooner. I was selfish, wanting to hold on to the feeling of being just Alex for as long as possible. But here's what I need you to know. Every moment we shared was real. Every laugh, every conversation, every walk in the park. That was me, stripped of everything, except what matters. You said I didn't trust you, but that's not true. I trust you more than anyone I've ever known. I just didn't trust that the real me, not the billionaire, but the man who loves bad movies and good books and excellent lasagna, would be enough once you knew the truth. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking if we can start over with honesty this time. No more hiding, no more omissions, just truth, even if it's complicated. Whether you give me another chance or not, I want you to know that you changed my life. You reminded me that wealth means nothing without someone to share ordinary moments with. You taught me that the wrong number can sometimes lead to exactly the right person. With all my love and all my truth, Alex. He had the letter delivered to her apartment, then waited. 3 days passed with no response. Alexander found himself checking his phone constantly, something he'd never done even for million-dollar deals. He'd faced hostile takeovers with less anxiety than he felt waiting for Sophia's response. On the 4th day, his phone rang. The number made his heart stop. It was the same one that had called him by accident 2 months ago. "Hi." Sophia's voice was soft, uncertain. "Hi," he breathed, gripping the phone like a lifeline. "I got your letter. I've read it about 50 times. And? And I'm standing outside your office building. The security guard won't let me up without an appointment. Apparently, you're a very important person." Alexander was already heading for the elevator. "I'll be right down." He found her in the lobby, wearing jeans and the same flour-dusted apron from their first dinner. She held a covered dish in her hands. "I brought lasagna," she said. "I figured if we're starting over with honesty, we should start where we began, with dinner. But this time, you can tell me about the real boring meetings with CEOs, and I'll tell you about how I Googled you and spent an hour staring at your Wikipedia page in shock." "You Googled me?" "Of course I did. Do you know how weird it is to find out the guy you've been falling for could buy a small country? I needed to process." Alexander's heart skipped. Falling for. Sophia's cheeks reddened. Starting over with honesty, remember? Yes, falling for. Despite my better judgment, and the fact that you're apparently worth more than the GDP of some nations. None of that matters, Alexander said, stepping closer. The only value I care about is what you see in me. I see a man who answered a wrong number and changed my life. I see someone who sat through a kindergarten career day and let 5-year-olds ask if he'd ever met a robot. I see a person who's been lonely for so long he forgot that being himself was enough. Is it enough? The real question, Sophia said, is whether I'm enough. I'm a kindergarten teacher who drives a beat-up Honda and makes lasagna from my grandmother's recipe. I shop at discount stores, and my idea of a fancy night out is trying the new Thai place downtown. I don't fit in your world. You're right, Alexander said, and saw her face fall. You don't fit in that world, which is why I'm hoping you'll help me build a different one where wrong numbers lead to right people, where lasagna dinners matter more than gala events, where being real is worth more than being rich. Sophia set down the lasagna dish and stepped into his arms. That sounds like a world I'd like to live in. Their kiss tasted like new beginnings and truth, and the kind of wealth that had nothing to do with money. Over the following months, they navigated the complexity of merging two very different lives. There were challenges: paparazzi who couldn't understand why a billionaire was dating a kindergarten teacher, society events where Sophia felt out of place, moments when the disparity in their resources created awkwardness. But there were more moments of joy. Alexander discovered the pleasure of grocery shopping with someone he loved, of cooking meals together in her small kitchen, of reading bedtime stories to her students over video calls when she had to stay late for parent conferences. He learned that happiness wasn't something you could purchase. It was something you built, one ordinary moment at a time. Sophia, for her part, helped Alexander reshape his relationship with wealth. Together, they established a foundation focused on early childhood education, with Sophia leading the initiatives while Alexander provided the resources. She showed him how money could create opportunities without creating obligations, how generosity worked best when it empowered rather than enabled. You know what I love most about us, Sophia said one evening, a year after the wrong number call. They were sitting on the balcony of Alexander's penthouse, but they'd made it theirs. Plants everywhere, mismatched furniture from her apartment, mixed with his expensive pieces, children's artwork framed alongside priceless paintings. What's that? Alexander asked, pulling her closer. We're proof that sometimes the best things in life come from mistakes. Wrong numbers, broken down cars, spilled juice on drawings. All of it can lead somewhere beautiful if you're open to the possibility. Alexander thought about the man he'd been that night, alone in his office, successful and empty. He thought about how close he'd come to not answering an unknown number, how easily he could have missed this chance at real connection. You know what I love most, he said, that you still make me feel like just Alex. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, just a guy lucky enough to love a kindergarten teacher who makes incredible lasagna. Speaking of which, Sophia said with a grin, I should probably mention that I've been taking cooking classes. I can now make more than just lasagna. Why would you mess with perfection? Because, she said, even perfect things can become more interesting with a little variety. Kind of like how a billionaire's life got more interesting when a teacher called the wrong number. 2 years after that fateful misdial, Alexander stood in Sophia's kindergarten classroom after hours, helping her decorate for the spring showcase. He was balanced on a stepladder hanging paper butterflies when she said, You know, I never did pay you back for fixing my car. I told you to pay it forward, he reminded her. I did. I've been volunteering at the literacy center extra hours, helping single parents who are struggling. But I still owe you personally. You owe me nothing. You've given me everything. Well, in that case, Sophia said, pulling something from her desk drawer. Consider this interest on the debt. She handed him a small box. Inside was a simple keychain with 2 charms, a tiny phone and a car. So you never forget how we met, she explained. As if I could, Alexander said, climbing down to kiss her. Best wrong number of my life. Mine too, Sophia agreed. Though technically, I'm the one who dialed wrong. No, Alexander said, thinking of all the ways his life had changed, all the warmth and meaning she'd brought to his success. You dialed exactly right. It just took us both a while to realize it. The sun was setting over the city, painting the classroom in shades of gold. Somewhere in the distance, a phone was ringing, and Alexander smiled at the sound. Every ring was a possibility, every answered call a potential adventure. But he'd already found his greatest adventure in a tearful wrong number from a stranger who'd become his everything. As they locked up the classroom and headed home together, to their home, a perfect blend of his sophistication and her warmth, Alexander reflected on the twists of fate that had brought them together. He'd spent years building a fortune, only to discover that his greatest treasure had come free of charge, delivered by accident on an ordinary evening when he'd chosen to answer an unknown call. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked, noticing his contemplative mood. "Just that I've made a lot of calculated decisions in my life. Mergers, acquisitions, investments, all carefully planned. But the best decision I ever made was completely unplanned. Picking up the phone that night. Second best," Sophia corrected. "The best decision was not hanging up when I started crying about my broken-down car." "Third best," Alexander countered. "The actual best was being honest with you, finally, even when I thought I'd lose you." "Fourth best," Sophia laughed, "because the real best decision was giving us another chance. They could have continued the game all the way home, cataloguing the choices that had led them to each other. But some stories are better lived than told, and theirs was still being written, one honest conversation, one shared meal, one ordinary moment at a time." In his pocket, Alexander's phone buzzed with messages about meetings and deals and opportunities. He ignored them all. He'd learned that the most important calls were rarely scheduled, that the best opportunities came disguised as accidents, and that sometimes a wrong number could be the most right thing that ever happened. As they walked hand in hand through the city streets, Sophia suddenly said, "I love you, you know. Not your success or your money or what you can do for me. Just you, the man who answered when I needed help." "I love you too," Alexander replied. "The woman who reminded me that help isn't always about what you can afford to give. Sometimes it's just about being willing to answer when someone calls." Above them, the stars were beginning to appear, each one a distant light in the darkness. But Alexander had found his own light closer to home, in a kindergarten teacher who dialed his number by mistake and ended up calling him back to himself. They were proof that love could bridge any gap, that connection mattered more than circumstances, and that sometimes the universe's mistakes were actually its greatest gifts. All it took was the courage to answer when opportunity called, even if it came in the form of a crying stranger with a broken-down car and the wrong number. As they reached their building, Sophia's phone rang. She looked at the screen and frowned. "I don't recognize this number." Alexander grinned. "Answer it. You never know. It might change your life." She laughed, but she answered, and it was just someone trying to sell insurance. But the principle remained. Every call was a chance, every connection a possibility. They'd learned that lesson in the most unexpected way, and they'd never forget it. That night, as they shared dinner in their home filled with plants and pictures and love, Alexander raised his glass in a toast. To wrong numbers that turn out right, to broken cars that lead to fixed hearts, to kindergarten teachers who see billionaires as just people, and to answering the call, whatever it might bring. Sophia clinked her glass against his. To all of that, and to lasagna. Never underestimate the power of good lasagna. They laughed, and the sound filled their home with warmth. Outside, the city hummed with millions of lives intersecting, millions of phones ringing, millions of chances for connection. But inside, two people who'd found each other through a misdial celebrated the beautiful accident of their love. And somewhere in the city, another phone rang with a wrong number. Another chance for magic waited on the line. Because that's how the best stories begin, not with careful planning or perfect circumstances, but with the simple willingness to answer when life calls, even if it's not the call you were expecting. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey of love, chance, and the magic of human connection. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you'll never miss another powerful story like this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a wrong number or chance encounter that changed your life? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin with unexpected moments. Keep your heart open to possibilities, and don't forget to answer when opportunity calls, even if it comes from an unknown number. Until next time, keep believing in love, miracles, and the power of human kindness.